They said she was just a poor black girl with nothing but a threadbare blanket to her name. A scrap of wool she clutched like it might keep the whole winter out. But one night, in a drafty church house where the cold came crawling under the doors, she saw a boy with no shoes and no one to call his own. She tore her blanket in two and wrapped him in it, though it meant her own shoulders would shake till morning. Folks thought it was kindness, nothing more. What they didn't know was that this small act would ripple far beyond that room, drawing the eye of men who carried power, money, and secrets. And before it was done, that girl would stand at the center of a storm she never asked for, with a reward waiting that no one, not even she, could have believed. The story begins in Willow Creek. Back then, life in that little Mississippi town was as bare-boned as the pine rafters in the church house. Winters hit hard, blowing down from the hills with an edge sharp enough to make even strong men curse under their breath. The dirt road through town turned to frozen ruts, the wells skinned over with ice, and smoke from cook fires rose thin and gray. For those who had nothing, the season wasn't just harsh, it was dangerous, and among the poorest of the poor was a girl named Liza May. Now if you'd seen her on the street, you wouldn't have looked twice. Small frame, eyes too big for her face, a dress patched in so many places it was more stitch than fabric. Folks knew she was the daughter of Ruth May, a washerwoman who died coughing blood the winter before, leaving the girl with no kin and no land. Most children in her place would have been taken by somebody, an uncle, an aunt, even a neighbor. But Liza had no such luck. People pitied her. Sure, but pity don't keep you warm and it sure don't put bread on the table. So she worked where she could. She carried buckets of water for pennies, scrubbed floors till her hands were raw, picked through trash behind the general store for scraps of cloth she could mend into something useful. And at night, she wrapped herself in that one tattered blanket, brown wool worn thin but still carrying the smell of her mama's soap, and prayed she'd wake to see the morning. That year the cold came early. November felt like January, and by December the river itself was carrying chunks of ice down its muddy current. The people of Willow Creek gathered in the church house most nights, not just for prayer but for warmth. The old wood stove in the corner spat sparks and rattled like a living thing, but it was better than sitting alone in cabins where the wind howled through cracks in the boards. It was there, in that church house, that Liza first saw the boy. He couldn't have been more than 6, maybe 7, barefoot with a shirt so thin you could see his ribs through it. Hair matted, eyes hollow. Nobody seemed to know where he'd come from. Some said he was the child of a drifter who'd died on the road. Others whispered he'd been abandoned, just dropped off and left like an unwanted pup. All Liza knew was that he sat alone in the back pew, shivering so hard the wood rattled beneath him. And something about him tugged at her. Maybe it was because she knew what it was to be alone. Maybe it was because she'd seen that same hollow-eyed look in her own reflection too many times. Or maybe it was just that the sight of a child shaking in the cold makes even the poorest soul feel rich enough to give something. That night, the wind slipped through the church walls like knives. People huddled close to the stove, whispering prayers and hymns, breath clouding the air. Liza sat in the back, blanket pulled tight around her shoulders when she noticed the boy's lips turning blue, his arms wrapped around his thin frame. But it wasn't enough. She looked at her blanket, then at him, then back at the blanket again. Now understand this. That blanket wasn't just cloth. It was memory. It was the last thing her mama had tucked around her, the last bit of warmth she carried from the woman who'd raised her. It was her shield against the cold world. To give it up was no small thing. But she didn't hesitate long. Quiet as a shadow, she walked over, sat beside the boy, and without a word tore the blanket down the middle. Half for him, half for her. She draped her piece over his shaking frame, tucking it around his shoulders the way her mama once had for her. The boy's eyes flicked up at her, wide and unsure. He didn't speak, just leaned into the wool, breathing slow, like someone who'd been drowning and finally caught air. And though her own arms were bare now, skin prickled and teeth clattering, Liza didn't regret. The next morning, whispers began. Did you see what that May girl did? Crazy, tearing her only blanket like that. She'll freeze to death come January. Maybe so, but that boy, he'd be dead already if not for her. In small towns, word travels faster than fire on prairie grass. By noon, Everybody knew of the girl who split her blanket for an orphan boy. Some shook their heads at her foolishness. Others called it pure Christian charity. And a few, the kind who watched life with sharp eyes, saw something more, a spark, because sometimes the smallest act shines brightest in the darkest night. What Liza didn't know, what nobody knew, was that someone else had been watching that night. In the far corner of the church, hidden in shadow, sat a man who hadn't joined the prayers or the hymns. He was no townsman, no farmer come in from the fields. He was a stranger, coat fine, boots polished, eyes cold as glass. He said little, but he saw everything. And when he saw that girl split her blanket without a word, he leaned forward, the faintest smile touching his lips, because for him it wasn't just kindness. It was proof that even in the poorest corner of the South, even in a town where folks barely scraped by, there was something rare, something money couldn't buy. And that night he made a decision. But here's the thing about decisions made in the dark. They don't stay hidden forever. Liza May thought she'd simply helped a boy through one bitter night. What she didn't know was that her choice had set a chain in motion, one that would carry her into danger, into heartbreak, and into a reward she could never have imagined. And by the time the snow melted, her name would be on every tongue in Willow Creek, not just as the poor girl with a blanket, but as the girl who changed everything. By the next Sunday, the story had taken on a life of its own. Willow Creek was small and talk traveled faster than the mail coach. Men in the barber shop shook their heads at the foolishness of a girl who'd given away half her blanket when she had so little to start with. Women at the wash line whispered about the May girl in voices that carried. She's either touched by God, one said, wringing out a shirt, or touched in the head, maybe both, another answered. But children, they looked at her different. Little ones who'd once ignored her, tugged at her sleeve, shy but curious. To them, she wasn't just the poor orphan girl anymore. She was the girl who'd saved a boy, with nothing more than half a scrap of wool. Liza didn't know what to make of it. She hadn't done it to be seen. Truth be told, she'd rather folks forgot. But there was no untying that knot now. Her name was in the air, and every time she walked down Main Street, eyes followed. As for the boy, he clung to her like a shadow. She learned his name was Samuel, though folks called him Sammy, on account of how small he was. He never said much. Didn't talk about his parents, or where he'd come from. But when Liza split her cornbread with him, or showed him how to patch holes in his shoes with scraps of leather, his face lit in a way that made her chest ache. "You don't owe me nothing, you know," she told him one night, as they huddled in the church house corner, the blanket halves pulled tight around them. Sammy's voice was a whisper, raspy from cold. "You gave me something nobody ever did before." "What's that?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes wide and solemn. Warmth. She didn't know how to answer, so she just pulled the blanket tighter around both of them and let the silence speak. Now remember that man in the shadows. He hadn't just been passing through. For 3 nights straight, he came to that church house, always sitting far in the corner, eyes hidden under the brim of his hat. Folks noticed, sure, but in a town used to drifters and salesmen, they didn't ask questions. But his gaze never left Liza. On the 4th night, when the prayers had ended and people began to file out, he rose and crossed the floorboards with a quiet confidence. Boots polished, coat clean despite the mud outside, hands gloved in leather. He wasn't a farmer. He wasn't a mill. His very presence said he belonged to another world, the kind of world that measured wealth not in scraps of cloth, but in gold coins and sealed letters. He stopped in front of Liza and the boy. "You're the one they talk about," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced. "The girl with the blanket." Liza's first instinct was to shrink back, clutching Sammy's shoulder. "I don't know what you mean, sir." He smiled, just a faint curve of the lips. "Don't play small. I saw it with my own eyes." Sammy stiffened under her arm. The man tipped his hat politely, then walked out into the cold night, leaving only questions behind. From that night on, the stranger's presence hung over her. He'd appear in odd places by the general store, near the well, leaning against the fence at the edge of town, always watching, never approaching. The townsfolk noticed too. "You best be careful, Liza May," the preacher's wife warned. Men who watch girls like that don't mean well. Maybe he's fixin' to offer her work, another guessed. But Liza couldn't shake the chill his eyes gave her. It wasn't just interest, it was calculation, like a man studying a puzzle piece he meant to use. Meanwhile the cold bit harder. Food grew scarce, and Liza's body thinned with hunger. She could have begged, sure. Folks might have shared scraps if she'd asked. But pride is a heavy thing, and hers wouldn't let her kneel. Instead, she worked harder. She hauled more buckets, scrubbed more floors, patched more shoes, and when Sammy's stomach growled, she split whatever she had with him, even if it meant going without herself. One night, as they shared the heel of a loaf, Sammy whispered, "Why do you do this?" "Do what?" "Keep me fed when you're hungry too." She gave him a small smile. "'Cause somebody's gotta show you the world ain't all cold." And though her belly ached, her heart felt full in a way it hadn't since her mama died. It was 2 weeks later when the stranger finally made his move. She was carrying a bucket from the well when he stepped out of the shadows, blocking her path. "Miss May," he said, his tone polite but firm, "I believe you and I should talk." Liza's fingers tightened on the bucket handle. "I don't reckon I've got business with you." "You do now." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. The jingle of coins inside was unmistakable. He held it out to her. "This is for you." She froze. "Why?" "Because I value what you did. Splitting your blanket, feeding that boy, sharing what little you had. That shows character. And character, Miss May, is rarer than gold." Her heart pounded. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that. "I don't want your money," she said. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in curiosity. "Most wouldn't turn it down. You're different." "That's good." He tucked the pouch back inside his coat. "Think on it. I'll be back." And with that he walked away. By now Willow Creek was buzzing. Some said the stranger was a benefactor, maybe a businessman looking to lift her out of poverty. Others muttered darker things, that he was hunting for something, and Liza was the bait. Even the preacher took her aside one evening. "Child, men with polished boots don't spend their time in Willow Creek unless they want something. Guard your soul careful." She nodded, but inside she burned with questions. Why her? Why now? Sammy felt it too. One night, as they huddled under their half-blankets, he whispered, "I don't like him." "Who?" "The man. The one who watches you. His eyes, they're mean." Liza brushed his hair back gently. "Don't you worry, I won't let nobody hurt us." But the truth was, she wasn't sure she could keep that promise, because the stranger wasn't finished. His visits grew bolder, his words sharper, and each time he appeared, the weight of something bigger, something dangerous, pressed heavier on her shoulder. What Liza didn't know was that the man carried more than coins in his pocket. He carried secrets, secrets that could tear a town apart. And soon he'd force her to choose: keep hiding in the shadows, or step into a world where kindness came with a price, and every gift carried a cost. Sleep didn't come easy to Liza anymore. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw that man's gloved hand holding out the pouch of coins. His words rang in her head. Character is rarer than gold. She'd never been praised for anything before. Never been told she was different in a way that mattered. Folks pitied her. Sure. But that was a far cry from what he'd said. Still, she didn't trust it. Kind words from strangers were like sugar in bitter tea, sweet at first, but you never knew what it might hide. Sammy stirred beside her, small frame curled under half a blanket. She pulled her piece over him too, though it left her own arms cold. Watching his chest rise and fall, she whispered to the shadows, "Whatever you're after, mister, you won't use him." The stranger returned 3 nights later. Not in the church this time, but on the road that cut past the mill pond. Liza was hauling water again when she saw him step out, coat brushing the dirt, breath misting in the night air. "Miss May," he said, tipping his hat like a gentleman, "I trust you've thought on my offer." "I told you," she answered, her voice steady though her knees trembled. "I don't want your money." He chuckled softly. "Not even for the boy." Her grip on the bucket tightened. "Leave him out of this." "I can't. He's the reason I noticed you. A girl who'd give half her blanket to an orphan she didn't know. Well, that tells me all I need." He studied her face, as if searching for cracks in her resolve. "I represent people, Miss May. People who need helpers, people who value loyalty, courage, selflessness, traits you've already proven. I'm no one's helper but my own, she shot back. His smile didn't falter. That's what you think. But life has a way of choosing for us. His words gnawed at her. Helpers, loyalty, courage. What did men like him need with a girl like her? The next day, at the well, she overheard the storekeeper muttering to a customer. They say the man's from up north, he whispered. Sent down to find folk with grit. Word is, there's money behind him, railroads, mills, maybe even government. He's looking for the desperate, the brave, and that May girl. She's both. Liza kept her head down, but her stomach twisted. If that was true, then this was bigger than charity. Bigger than coins in a pouch. That night, she prayed for guidance. Though heaven stayed silent. Sammy wasn't silent. I don't like him, he said flatly, gnawing on a crust of bread. He's got eyes like a hawk, like he's fixin' to swoop down and snatch something. He's just a man, Liza murmured, though she wasn't sure she believed it. No, Sammy said, shaking his head. Men walk. He glides, like he ain't made of the same stuff as us. Liza shivered. Children sometimes saw truth. Adults tried to ignore. On the 7th day he sent word. A folded note slipped under the church door where she slept. Meet me at the old mill. Midnight. Come alone. J.H. She stared at the letters until they blurred. J.H. Whoever he was, he had a name now, but no face worth trusting. Still something in her, call it curiosity, call it fear, pulled her toward that mill at midnight. The building loomed by the river, its windows black hollows, its wheel frozen with ice. She stepped inside, heart pounding. He was there, waiting. Good, he said, voice echoing off the beams. You came. Only to tell you to leave me be, she snapped. He laughed, low and amused. You've got fire. That's rare too. At last he spoke plain. I work for men who believe this country is changing, he said. Men who think the future won't be built by the ones who already have power, but by those willing to fight for it. They look for souls who've known hunger, loss and hardship, because those souls are strong. They endure. He stepped closer, his boots echoing. We want you, Miss, not to scrub floors, not to haul water, to be part of something greater, to carry messages, to watch, to listen, to stand where others cannot. You've got nothing tying you down, and everything to gain. She swallowed hard. And if I say no? He held her gaze, eyes glinting. Then you'll keep starving, freezing, breaking your back for pennies. And when that boy coughs blood, as your mama did, you'll have nothing to give him. But if you say yes, he'll never go hungry again. The air seemed to thicken. For the first time she realized the offer wasn't just about her. It was about Sammy. She walked home with his words burning in her skull. All she wanted was to keep the boy alive, to see him smile instead of shiver. But what kind of world asked her to trade her soul for his belly? Sammy watched her closely that night. What'd he say? Nothing you need to know, she murmured. You're thinking on it, he accused. She turned away. Go to sleep. But she couldn't, not with the weight pressing on her chest. By now the town was buzzing loud. I saw him give her a note, one man muttered. She's in league with him. Another whispered. Mark my words, she'll bring trouble to Willow Creek. Even the preacher's wife began to keep her distance. Liza felt the walls closing in. The stranger, J.H., pressed hard. He caught her outside the well again, his voice calm but sharp. Time's running short, he said. You need to decide. I don't want any part of your schemes, she snapped. You already have a part, he replied smoothly. You just don't see it yet. That boy is alive because of you. You think the world won't notice. It already has. I noticed. He leaned close, voice dropping to a whisper. Soon others will too. And they won't all be as kind as I am. That night as the wind howled through the church, Liza held Sammy close and tried to quiet her racing thoughts. But her peace was shattered by a sound at the door, 3 sharp knocks in the dark. She froze. Who's there? She whispered. No answer, just the creak of the hinges as the door swung slowly open, and in the cold moonlight, a figure stepped inside. Not J.H. but another man. rougher, meaner, eyes burning with purpose. He looked straight at her and said, "The blanket girl, huh? You're coming with me." The man who stepped through that church door wasn't polished like J.H. His boots were cracked, his coat torn at the sleeve, and his beard ragged with frost. But his eyes burned with a hunger that made Liza's blood run cold. He filled the doorway, blocking out the moonlight. Behind her, Sammy whimpered and clutched her half-blanket. "You're the girl," the man growled, his voice low as gravel, "the one with the blanket." Liza forced her voice steady. "What do you want?" He sneered. "What every man wants, girl. A chance, and you're my ticket." Before she could move, his hand shot out, gripping her arm like iron. Sammy yelped, trying to pull her free, but the man shoved him aside like a rag doll. "Leave him," she cried, struggling against the man's hold. "He's just a boy." But the intruder only laughed. "Ain't him thereafter. It's you." She twisted, kicked, clawed at his arm, but he was too strong. He dragged her toward the door, boots scraping on the church floorboards. "Help!" she shouted, though she knew no one was close enough to hear. Sammy, small but desperate, snatched up a broken pew leg and swung with all his might. The wood cracked against the man's shin. He cursed, stumbling just long enough for Liza to wrench free and shove Sammy behind her. "You're brave, boy," the intruder snarled, "but brave don't matter." He lunged again, and that's when another voice cut through the night. "Enough." The stranger, J.H., stepped from the shadows outside, calm as ever, eyes cold as glass. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice, just stood in the doorway with one gloved hand resting on the hilt of a pistol at his side. "Let her go," J.H. said. The intruder froze, though his grip didn't loosen. "She ain't yours," he spat. "She's not yours either," J.H. replied evenly. "But she is under my watch, and that makes her mine until I say otherwise." The two men locked eyes, the air between them taut as a drawn rope. At last the intruder shoved Liza to the floor and stepped back, scowling. "This ain't over," he hissed. "Others know. Others are coming." Then he slipped into the night, swallowed by the dark. Liza's chest heaved, her palms raw from the struggle. Sammy clung to her, trembling. She looked up at J.H., fury boiling in her chest. "What game are you playing, bringing men like that down on me?" J.H. crouched, his face unreadable. "That man wasn't mine, he was theirs." "Whose?" she demanded. "The ones who want to use you for less noble purposes," J.H. said. "The ones who see you as a tool, not a person. I warned you others would notice." "You set this up," she accused. He shook his head. "No, but I expected it. Which is why you need me." She glared at him, arms wrapped protectively around Sammy. "Why me? What do I have that men like you and him care about?" J.H. sat back on his heels, considering. Finally he spoke. "Because you made a choice most wouldn't. You split your last blanket. You shared what little you had. That act mocked you. To me, it showed strength. To men like him, it showed weakness to exploit. Either way, you can't go back to being invisible. The moment you gave, you were seen." His words settled over her like ice. She'd done what she thought was right, nothing more. But now it had painted a target on her back. "I don't trust you," she whispered. "You don't have to," J.H. replied. "But you need protection, and I can give." "And what do you want in return?" His eyes flickered to Sammy, then back to her. "Only that you consider my offer. Join me, and you'll have more than scraps. You'll have power, resources. Enough to keep that boy safe from men like the one tonight." She hated that part of her wanted to believe him. Standing by Liza's side as she hauled water, whispers grew sharper. "She's fallen in with him. She'll bring ruin on us all." The preacher himself confronted her, after service. "Liza, I don't know what's happening, but trouble follows you now. You best cut ties with that stranger before the whole town pays the price." Her jaw tightened. "And if I don't?" The preacher's eyes softened, but his words stayed firm. "Then you'll stand alone." That night, Sammy tugged at her sleeve. "Don't go with him." "Please, Liza. He talks pretty, but pretty words can be poison." She knelt, brushing the hair from his forehead. "I'm trying to keep you safe." "You already do," he whispered. You don't need him. His faith pierced her heart deeper than any warning. But she couldn't shake the truth. Danger had already found them. 2 nights later, the danger came roaring back. The church house filled with smoke before dawn, flames licking up the old wood walls. Liza woke coughing, dragging Sammy toward the sparks rained from the rafters, smoke thick as tar. Through the haze, she saw figures outside, shadows moving too deliberately to be by chance. Someone had set the blaze. She staggered into the snow. Sammy clutched to her chest. The fire roared behind them, the only home they'd known reduced to ash. And there, standing at the edge of the road, was J.H. His coat glowed orange in the firelight, his expression calm but unreadable. "They won't stop now," he said, voice cutting through the crackle of flame. "You see it, don't you? You're marked, and the only way forward is with me." Liza's heart pounded as the church collapsed behind her, sparks flying into the night sky. She wanted to scream at him, curse him, run from him, but the boy shivered in her arms, and the town stares had turned to suspicion. With nowhere left to go, and enemies closing in, she faced the terrible truth. J.H. might be the only shield she had left. But what kind of shield comes at a price you can't yet see? And as dawn broke over the smoldering ruins, she realized she'd have to decide, follow the man she didn't trust, or wait for the next fire to finish what the first had started. By morning, Willow Creek gathered around the black skeleton of the church, their faces lit by the thin gray smoke that still drifted skyward. The bell lay cracked in the snow, hymnals shriveled into char. It wasn't just a building gone, it was their hearth, their anchor, their excuse to believe tomorrow would be better. And when people lose their anchor, they look for someone to blame. It was her, someone whispered. She brought this trouble. That stranger. He lit the match himself. Liza stood at the edge of the crowd, Sammy pressed against her side. The boy's hand clutched her coat with the desperation of a drowning child. Behind her, J.H. waited like a carved shadow, his coat untouched by ash, his expression calm. She wanted to scream at them all that she had lost too, that her only home had burned down, her prayers turned to smoke. But her throat was stone. The preacher stepped forward, his beard singed at the edge, his eyes hollow. He spoke low. "Child, I told you trouble had found you. Now look," gestured at the ruin. "If you stay, more will follow." Liza's jaw tightened. "I didn't set that fire." "No," the preacher said softly. "But fires follow kindling, and you've become kindling." That night she sat by the river, snow dusting her shoulders. Sammy curled beside her, his breath a pale cloud. "I'll fix it," she whispered to the boy, though her words were carried off by the wind. "I'll find who did it." "Why?" he asked sleepily. "Because if I don't, they'll drive us out, and I ain't letting them drive you anyway." Behind them, J.H. spoke like a man who'd been waiting for her to break. "You can't stay invisible anymore. The moment you tore that blanket, you stepped onto a stage. The world is watching, Miss May. The question is, will you write the story, or let others write it for you?" Liza turned on him. "What do you want from me?" "The truth," he said, "and your courage." At dawn, riders appeared at the far edge of town. 3 men, their horses sweating steam, their faces hard. They asked after the blanket girl. By noon, 2 more strangers had been spotted at the mill road. It was clear now, the fire had only been the beginning. J.H. gathered her and Sammy in the corner of the burned church's parsonage kitchen, the last standing room with wall. He laid out papers on the table, thick, white, heavy with seals. "My name is James Hartwell," he said finally, "executor for the Hale Trust." The preacher frowned. "Hale? Railroad money?" "The same," Hartwell said. "Everett Hale made his fortune in iron and rail, but he died last year, left me coin and orders. Orders to write what he couldn't. And what's that to us?" Liza demanded. Hartwell's eyes were steady. "Because 30 years ago your mother, Ruth May, fed him from a pot with more water than beans, washed the blood from his coat. She gave him life when she had nothing. He died owing her a debt he could never repay. But he left me one last command. Find someone like her. Someone who gives when giving costs them most. That was you." The room went quiet. Even the preacher's breath seemed to stop. Liza's throat closed. She remembered her mama's hands, red from soap, cradling her face by firelight. She remembered the blanket, the same one she'd torn. "You mean," she whispered, "this all started with my mama's pot of soup?" Hartwell nodded. "Mercy," echoes Miss May. "Sometimes across a lifetime." From the leather folder he slid another paper forward, sealed with a red ribbon. "This," Hartwell said, "is a deed. The Hale Trust purchased the old Turner boarding house by the river. From this day forward it belongs to you on one condition, that you keep it open as a home and school for the poor and orphaned. Food and wages will be delivered by the Trust's agents. Repairs funded. Protection guaranteed." He set a smaller envelope beside it. "And this is a guardianship petition. If you'll have it, Sammy may carry your name." Sammy's fingers clutched hers, trembling. His eyes shone. Liza stared at the papers like they might vanish. "And if I say no, then it goes to another," Hartwell said calmly. "But the Trust doesn't believe you'll say no, because you've already chosen once, with that blanket." The preacher pressed a hand to the table. "Miss May," he said hoarsely, "if you sign, I'll stand with you. The church, what's left of it, will stand with you." But the men circling Willow Creek weren't gone. That night, as Liza carried water from the river, a shadow moved behind her. A voice hissed, "You think paper makes you safe. You think a stranger's promises mean more than blood. You'll pay, girl, you and the boy both." Hands reached. She dropped the bucket, heart hammering. Before she could scream, J.H. was there, pistol drawn, badge men at his back. The assailant fled into the dark, cursing, but the message was clear. The fight wasn't over. Hartwell holstered his weapon. "Mercy paints a mark. You've been painted. Now you'll need walls to keep out the wolves. That boarding house will be your wall." Liza shook, not from the cold. "And if I can't bear it?" Hartwell's voice softened. "Then remember this, you already bore it. That night in the church, when you split your blanket. The rest is only the same act, stretched wide enough to cover more shoulders." 2 days later, townsfolk watched as wagons rolled in. Planks, barrels, flour, nails, quilts. Word spread that the boarding house was being repaired, not for profit, but for people. At first they came curious. Then with offerings, a farmer brought onions, a widow offered quilts, children carried chairs, someone painted the sign over the door, "The Blanket House." By week's end, 9 children slept under its roof. Sammy guarded the front step with his church poker like it was a saber. The preacher prayed over the hammer in his hand as he nailed boards. Even those who'd whispered against her came with something small, a loaf, a song, a smile that cost nothing. Liza cooked oatmeal till the pot's rim gleamed. At night she read scripture to children who'd never heard their names spoken with care. For the first time since her mama died, she didn't feel alone. On the 7th night, Hartwell handed her another envelope. "One more thing," he said. She opened it carefully. Inside, in a hand that shook across the page, were the words of Everett Hale. "If this finds you, it means you chose mercy when you could have chosen hunger. I don't know your name, but I knew your kind once. I died owing a debt to Ruth May, and I ask you to let me pay it through you. This letter carries coin for your first winter, and a promise for the next. If you keep your doors open, the Trust will keep them filled. When people ask why, tell them a girl's blanket cut in two warmed a man 30 years too late." Liza read the words until her tears blurred. She folded the letter as gently as if it were a living thing. Sammy leaned against her shoulder. "What's it say?" "That mercy don't die," she whispered. "It just waits for its time." Spring came slow, softening the earth, greening the banks of the river. By then, the blanket house rang with laughter. Children who had once been shadows now ran in the yard with sun on their faces. Bread baked daily, quilts warmed more bodies than she could count, and songs rose from voices that had learned silence too young. The town changed too. Where once they had whispered suspicion, now they spoke pride. "That's our blanket house," they said. "That's our Liza May." She had no jewels, no fine clothes, no polished boot, but she had Sammy's hand in hers, the echo of her mama's kindness carried forward, and a house full of children who looked at her, with eyes that said home, and that was the reward, greater than coin, greater than deed, a reward beyond belief to turn sorrow into shelter, to turn a half blanket into a legacy, and sometimes on cold nights when the fire popped and the wind clawed at the shutters, Liza thought back to that first night in the church, when she'd torn her last comfort in two. She smiled then because she knew the truth, that one act had never left her, it had grown, it had spread, and it would keep spreading long after she was gone.